Playing the flop multi-way is one of the most complex things in the game, and it's something that most people haven't optimized for good reasons, because up until recently, there haven't really been fast three-way solvers. I think there was only one simple three-way on the market, which was a very specific product, only solving three-way, and it was also not an AI-based solver. So it took quite a while to make some solutions. But now GTO Wizard came out with the three-way solution or solver solutions just recently. And so I found this hand, which is interesting for especially the flop play. And it may be mostly interesting for you if you play a little bit lower stakes or maybe even live poker, because in those two areas, I think multi-way flops or multi-way pots in general are happening the most often. And also, as we'll see, we have a very likely to be a recreational player in the mix, which also changes dynamic quite a bit. And so if you play low stakes or live games, but of course also if you play mid stakes and higher, there will also always be some recreationals in the mix. So I think this will be a good video to learn something about this. So we have pocket kings here in Davy Jones's position from the hijack. Button calls, as said, this guy is very likely, or I'm very sure this guy is a recreational. Then Moonostar, one of the top regs, calls in the big blind as well. And we flop gin. So here you might have the impression, okay, we can do anything because we just have the nuts here. One thing that top sets like to do a lot in almost all spots is to just check, because first of all, we have a hand that is less vulnerable than others. So if we had like king 10 here, any ace would kill our action or even beat our hand. That is not happening for pocket kings here, but more importantly probably is because we block a lot of our opponent's calling ranges. So if we have two kings, our opponent obviously have less king x hands in their ranges, and so we are incentivized to slow play a little bit more, have them put in money, and preferably or most dominantly put in money as a bluff, because if they have a value hand, then they would obviously just call our bet, but if they bluff, then they wouldn't put the money in if we bet ourselves. So Moonostar checks, and we as the preflop aggressor have the chance to bet here. Here, I think we can already start our simulation and see what would be the solver's play here. And then with the assumption in mind that this guy is a recreational player, we can then adjust his ranges a little bit, his pre-flop range, maybe also some of the flop play or tendencies he might have, and then see how that changes our behavior as the pre-flop raiser. We pre-flop, I think we raised 2.25x, yep, and we will go with that. We can go with the 125, I think. Well, let's just go with 100, so we can also apply this for other spots in general. And for that reason, we'll also go with the raked solution. Let's go with the NL 500 one. This game was rake free. However, we want to see what we can do if we are in our own games and playing. I think that's it already. So hijack opens, button calls, and here we already see that the GTO range would look something like this. Very tight in the off-suited region, and then for the suited region, every Broadway can call. Almost all ace-x can call, and then some suited connectors only. I believe if we are actually talking about a recreational here, the calling range is likely to be wider, but we will adjust that at a later point. Also, they will probably call more of these low pocket pairs as well. Then the big blind will have a decently wide range. It's not super huge, but it's also not super tight. However, again, if a recreational is involved here, Munostar will likely call a little bit wider. Maybe it also changes the 3-betting range, so the squeezing range, but I think that will be a little bit less impacted. It's probably mostly going to be more calls that we'll see just from Munostar to be involved in the hand, because his EV is going to be higher with a lot of these especially suited hands when a recreational is in play. So let's go with the GTO ranges here first and see what the stacks look like. So big blind has 286 blinds. Davey has 119 and he has 114. Pot is correct. Rake, we'll leave it at that. And now for the big blind, let's go with a donk bet of 1/3 and 2/3, just to see what their strategy would look like here. Would they donk a lot or not at all? For the hijack, we can go with many sizes, and here I want to play what actually happened first. So here, Davy Jones min bet doesn't go for 1/3 or 2/3 or just a check. He chooses to bet the minimum here, and yeah, we can later look into why that might be the play here. For to simulate that, let's just go with a 1%, which will be the minimum viable bet. One big blind here. Let's also give him a bigger bet size, which I don't think is going to be used in 3-way pots. But if we see that 100 is bet a lot, for example, then we can also add an overbet later. But I don't think that will be necessary. And then for imposition, let's just go with these two sizes as well. Maybe also a bigger one just to have it in there. And then for later streets, we can go with the same distribution of bets. But again, not going to look into too much of the turn and river play today. Just interested in how to tackle the flop. One step after the other. Can't do everything at once. So we see the big blind basically plays a pure checking range, which makes it simple for us. We don't have to assume anything. And here for the hijack, first off, top spot on bet size here from Davy Jones. One big blind is the size that the solver would use if it had these options, which I think cover our general options very well. So the smallest possible bet size would be the one that the solver actually uses here. So you can already assume he's done some research on this topic, not too surprising, given how good he is. And for the range that bets here, we can already see when looking at the hand classes that basically every hand class bets at some frequency. Sets, mix, bets and checks 50-50. Two pair almost the same. Over pairs check a little bit more often. So the ones with the diamonds and clubs bet the most often, probably because they have the most EV, which is good to put some money in. And then top pairs pretty much mix completely. First of all, we haven't really looked into the kings. So kings, no matter the suit, they basically check and bet 50-50. So that's already interesting. Under pairs then check a little bit more often, which makes sense because they get caught by better quite a lot, and they don't need that much protection actually. and if they are getting called by better, they have not too many outs to improve. Second pair can bet a little bit more often just because they have a little bit more of outs against better pairs, and also they block two pair and sets in our opponent's ranges. Same for third pairs, that's why we see 40% of bets here. They may actually also fold out some better hands, maybe even. Not sure about that. Maybe some pocket pairs would start folding. If one other player called, then the third one might already have to fold some pocket pairs. Under pairs, however, barely ever bet. Ace highs, those are mostly flush draws and backdoor flush draws that bet. Not too surprising here. Also for the offsuited region, we basically see the backdoor flush draws with one club betting, other ones mostly check. And then here it's also draws, so gut shots, backdoor flush draws and straight draws, and barely any trash. So if we have like queen, jack of spades, of hearts, then these hands just want to check and not invest any money into the pot. Same with the offsuit combos here. Only the ones with a club like to bet, if at all. So quite reasonable. If we have any equity or future nut equity, then we can invest some money here as a CBet. And if we want to CBet, then we want to go for a small size. And yeah, let's quickly look at the reactions from players. So here in position would then call anything that is third pair and better, basically. So sixes sometimes fold if they don't have a club, but everything better than that can always call. Some lower pairs now already start folding. And ace high without a backdoor flush draw also have to fold basically purely. Same for these hands that are queen high and lower. And in the hand we see that this guy then calls. Munistar check raises, which we'll see is going to happen quite often. So 20% of the time almost is going to be a raise for Munistar. So sets almost check raise purely. Two pair, especially the 7x combos, king 5 can check call. Top pairs we see sometimes check raise, mostly those with backdoor flush draws. So again, more equity, the more we want to put in money into the pot. Under pairs don't really check raise, don't have too much of an incentive. And here we see 7x, especially the low ones, 6x, 8x, and 7-4, 7-6. These have the benefit that they also have backdoor straight draws. And this always shows that this really has an impact. You might think, well, how often does it really happen that we make a backdoor straight? But this shows that there is a big difference. So equity differences might only be 1 or 2%, maybe 3, I'm not sure. But if we invest more money with those few percentages more in equity, then that will show over the long term. And we can see that by the solver check raising these hands more often. It might also be the case that 7-4 maybe folds out some king 7 or a7 in their opponent's range, which is also going to be beneficial for their EV if they fold out better hands. Third pair, pretty much the same we can see here. Again, these hands make for good bluffs on later streets because they block sets and two pair. So they can check raise the flop already. And then we see some flush draws check raise. The higher ones check raise more often, and the lower ones just check call more often. And here, yeah, it's basically those hands that have some equity, straight draws, gut shots, open enders, and flush draws that continue here. Quickly, just to see what happens against the check raise. Kings mostly just call, which is what happens here. So Davy Jones just calls. We don't have a big raising range here. Only sets, so pocket sevens, and then some 7x and 5x blockers would check would 3-bet here, and then this guy folds. So let's go back to the flop and see if anything happens to our strategy if we change anything in the big blinds, in the buttons ranges and strategies. So first, let's duplicate this tab and change their preflop range. So we can go back to their range on the button, and let's just keep it really simple. So we will just say that they always call these hands that are broadways. Yeah, might be 3-betting some ace queen, but let's also say that they mostly or always call these pocket pairs. Whoops, that was not intentional. Can we revert that? Nope. So, okay, I have to start again. Pocket pairs. And then also these suited connectors. Let's just give him 100% calling ranges with those. Again, maybe they'll 3-bet some of those, but let's just keep it really simple and say they 3-bet this range here, the black ones, and call all of these hands right here. Maybe even a little bit wider. King 8. Yeah, let's keep it at this. It looks quite reasonable for a recreational. Now we'll run it again. We haven't changed any ranges for the other players. Big blind still checks range. And now we see in position bets a little bit bigger on average. So now the preferred size is even 1/3. We still bet for one big blind quite often, so 18% of the time. Let's have a look at what that was previously. 24%, so 30% of bets overall. Now we bet more than 40% of the time, and we bet more often for 1/3. So the first lesson we can learn here, if in position, so the button calls a wider range, then we can bet bigger on average, just because we have a bigger range advantage and we want to charge their hands a little bit more on average. So also we see that especially the value hands, it appears, so sets, 2-pair and overpairs, they bet more often mainly, which makes sense. Again, what I basically just said, we want to charge them more, get more value out of the button's hands when we bet. And which hands are we going to do that with? With our value hands, of course. Again, we can directly compare. We also see ace high and king high, ace high and lower hands increase in betting frequency. Basically every hand class bets a little bit more often, but most of that is gonna come from or benefit our value hands. But also our weak hands, our bluffs, so to say, will profit from that as well, just because when the button has a wider range, then we will also see more folds on average, just because they don't have a good hand as often on average. And now what we can also do is keep this this button's range, but let's say against the bet, and that would have to be against both a small and a big bet. We can also change their reaction. So let's just go back to the original. No, we have to use the recreational preflop range. So let's say against the bet, they would have to play this range in GTO against a small bet. So basically calling every third pair and better. Also a lot of low pairs, ace highs as well. So also a lot of backdoor draws, but even ace queen. Now we can think about what hands would they actually call. And of course, that depends a lot on this player's tendencies. So some players just call a lot more. Some players play even tighter because they don't know that a backdoor flush draw is worth a lot here and they have to defend or can defend a lot against a one big blind bet. However, at first glance, this doesn't seem too far off for even a recreational. So I don't see obvious differences that we would expect from a recreational against this type of bet. Maybe they call a little bit more often with these low pocket pairs. Maybe they don't. So I don't think this is that far off. Against a 1/3 bet, we would likely see something similar. However, here I think these hands will just never start folding against a 1/3 bet, at least not from a recreational. Also sixes, it's going to be the same. Maybe those low pairs will call a lot more often as well. So here I think we can actually go ahead and note lock a different strategy. And let's just again keep it very simple and say that they always call these hands, and then maybe, yeah, let's give them 50% of a calling range. Whoops. With these low pocket pairs. What else do we have? I think the rest looked quite reasonable, but we'll have another look. Yeah, whether they fold these backdoor ace high flush draws or not, I'm not too sure. Ace queen, ace jack with backdoor flush draws. I wouldn't say it's clear either way whether they always fold or always call. So let's just leave them at that. And we also see flush draws always call, which is quite reasonable of an assumption. One thing you might expect maybe is that they might raise more often with their very good hands. So maybe sets or a two pair. Do they have any two pair actually? No, I don't think so. No. So if they have any sets here, they maybe raise those more often. So let's just give them a little bit of a raising range as well. Yeah, let's say they raise sets 30% of the time. Obviously, they don't fold the rest of the time. So, right. Lock it and apply. And now we have a strategy that looks a little bit different against a 1/3 bet size compared to the other ones, which probably makes it that we want to bet 1/3 more often because there's a bigger mistake happening against that. But again, I think the reaction against one big blind isn't too unlikely to happen in practice. We might, just to be very accurate, also put in maybe a little bit more raises, just slightly more often against that bet as well. Lock it, and then see how our strategy changes as the preflop raiser. All right, so we see a little bit of a difference. So we bet a little bit more often for 1/3. I think the one big blind bet barely changed. And yeah, it's like 4 percentage points more of a bet overall. So not a huge difference. I haven't saved the one to compare. Would have been a better idea, but I think, yeah, we can compare here. Right. So which one was the previous one? This one is the previous one, and this one is the current one. And we'll see that, yeah, bets with, wait, did we never bet one big blind? We did, right? Didn't we? Wait, I think this might be, yeah, no. Yeah, this one was it. This one was the previous one where we assigned the button a recreational preflop range, but a GTO reaction against all of our bets. And here we, as Davy Jones, would have bet 18% of the time for one big blind and then 22% for 1/3. Now we increased that frequency a little bit, but it's not that different overall. So here we'll see that sets bet a little bit less often actually for one pot. So they bet more often for 1/3. So we want to value bet more often if we see more calls. I think it was, yeah, with those under pairs we see more calls and also more raises. Then we can bet a little bit more often for value. Same for 2-pair, same for the over pairs, same for top pairs. Even for our under pairs, we can bet it slightly more often. Second pairs as well, third pairs as well. But then low pairs bet a little bit less often for 1/3. Now bet a little bit more often for one big blind. Ace size bet a little bit more often, and then no mate hand as well. So basically we go a little bit more polar with our bets. We bet our best hands more often and our worst hands more often, but then check a little bit more often with our second pairs. No, wait, with our low pairs. So those hands that really don't want to invest any money, basically. So these low pocket pairs here, we can check more often. One thing we haven't looked into, and I want to do this really quickly, is we also have to adjust the reaction against a check, because if we check, then our opponent will play differently than GTO as well, very, very likely, especially when they are recreational. So against the check, the button would have to play this strategy in theory, bet mostly 1/3, and do it with sets, 2-pair, also under pairs, second pairs, third pairs. All of these would mix in some bets, ace-high mostly with flush draws and backdoor flush draws, but also ace-8 of spades and hearts would bet here. So ace-10 off as well. Not too unlikely if you ask me. So I would definitely assume that the player here would not bet as many bluffs. Of course, if he is very aggressive, there are certain types of recreationals who just like to bluff a lot, then that is very different. But just judging from one other hand I saw, he wasn't really that active. So let's just quickly give him arranged that bets a little bit less often with these second pairs, third pairs. Let's just go for the extreme just to see what happens, in which direction our strategy changes, in which direction our strategy shifts if our opponent doesn't bet too often with these types of hands. Doesn't have to be that extreme of a difference, but we just want to see in which direction we want to adjust. So let's also say they bet a little bit more often with their top pairs, not checking that often. And then let's just have them always bet with their sets. And we will, in this example, just use the 1/3 size for all of their bets. Of course, they might choose bigger bet sizes with better hands, so that would make it even more different. But just for simplicity, we will just give them one bet size for all of their bets. All right, apply. So overall, they check a little bit more often and a lot more straightforward. What does that make us do? We basically never want to go for the one big blind bet, but always use a bigger one, which is the 1/3. And we will also look into the differences. So also we just bet less often overall, which is interesting. Probably just because our opponent makes such a big mistake against the check. And then we are more likely to profit on that when we face their strategy when we check. So yeah, it's still very balanced, so we don't see a clear pattern towards betting or checking certain types of hands. Basically, all of them bet a little bit less often, and then we likely see a bit of a difference when we can check raise. But yeah, let's keep it at this. We are already at half an hour. And this is something you can go very deep in, change every single aspect of an opponent's strategy. We haven't even touched Munistar here. So if we change this guy's strategy and then this guy's as well, then we will see so many differences in our strategy. But just as a summary, when we see wider preflop ranges from the button, we can bet a little bit bigger here on the flop. If we see wider calling ranges against certain bet sizes, then we can also use that bet size more often, and we want to go a little bit more polar. So bet more value more often and more worse hands for more often. And if we see them change their strategy against the check a lot, which is likely the case here because the strategy against a check would be quite bet heavy across all hand classes, which I don't see happen that often in practice, then we can also consider taking the checking line more often and have them make a mistake against the check more often. However, all the things considered, when we are in a three-way pot, one big blind bet size is the most preferred in GTO. And also, just for our hand, we can see that kings basically always want to bet quite a lot. So even in this last simulation that we ran, where we check most often of all, kings are still betting a lot of the time. Here it would be for 1/3 because we adjusted the button's reaction against the 1/3 bet, but still kings don't really want to check in any of these cases, especially not if our opponent's pre-flop range is wider than it should be, which is very likely when the guy is a recreational. So betting, yes, betting bigger, possible. Checking, yeah, it's never a mistake, but you likely gain more EV by just betting here. All right, so lastly, let's look at the hand, what turned out to happen. Munistar check raises as said, then Davy Jones calls. This guy went out here, then Munistar continued to barrel for a pot size bet. We call, and on the river, Munistar basically shuts down. We then try to get a little bit more value here, even though the run out probably helps Munistar quite a lot. So when we see a check, we probably can value bet very easily and happily. But if we face a jam on this run out, it's not too likely he has 8-9. It's not too likely he has a backdoor flush draw. Of course, we might even beat some value here. And of course, we still beat bluffs. But if we face a river jam here, it's not the biggest snap call of our, or it's probably a snap call, but it's not a very fist pump call. However, when we see a check, we can comfortably value bet and we just see a fold. So that's why the rest of the hand wasn't that much of a spectacle, but the flop play is something where I think a lot of players are a little bit lost, and maybe this quick deep dive on the strategy helped clear something up for you. All right, what do you think? Have you experienced something with the three-way solver? Have you found any principles, any patterns that are different from heads-up simulations or heads-up spots? Let me know, and I'm happy to see you in the next video. See ya.